Welcome back again, gang. This is part 4 of our Chapter 11 lecture series. This section is entitled Slave Culture. The focus question for this section is, how did family, gender, religion, and values combine to create distinct slave cultures in the Old South? At the center of slave communities stood the slave family. Although the law did not recognize slave marriages, many lasted for a lifetime unless disrupted by sale. Plantation owners generally did allow slaves to marry, even though technically this was not a legal union. Sometimes those marriages occurred even among slaves between different plantations, or even between slaves and free blacks. Marriage was seen by owners as a way of ensuring their slaves would remain docile and compliant. And of course, they encouraged childbirth because more slave children meant more slaves. And of course, more slaves meant more money. Due to the sale of slaves and that threat of sale, there was a higher number of female-headed than male-headed households. Male fathers more often were sold away than female mothers. And of course, slave traders generally gave little consideration to preserving family ties when it came to the buying and selling of the enslaved. When it came to gender roles among the enslaved population, they were generally a bit different from larger society. There was a sort of equality of powerlessness. Both men and women were subject to the whims of their owners. Men in particular were powerless to protect their women and children from abuse and exploitation, which did not allow them to really claim the sort of manly status according to the gender norms of the time. And of course, the cult of domesticity that was so important to white women, both in the North and South, did not apply to slave women who on the plantation were generally expected to work very similar roles as the slave men did. That being said, when the enslaved population worked on their own time, their own free time outside of white influence and oversight, black men and women typically reflected the standard gender roles of the day. In the first half of the 19th century, religion became integral to the lives of most of the enslaved population in the southern United States. And this reflected a distinctive version of Christianity, heavily influenced by the Second Great Awakening. Many slaves adopted Christianity during that time. The emotional aspects and appeals of this sort of evangelical Christianity promoted by the Second Great Awakening very much attracted the enslaved population. The enslaved combined traditional African beliefs and practices, especially singing and dancing, to Christian practice, helping to make the African American version of Christianity quite distinct from its white counterpart. The biblical story of Exodus, of the escape of the Jewish slaves from Egypt to the Promised Land, became a central tenet to black Christianity. However, to masters, Christianity was seen as another means of control. They encouraged preachers to preach obedience. However, the Christian message of equality before the Creator undermined this message of control and obedience, and the slaves' acceptance of their lot in life and in society. Thanks in no small part to the message of equality inherent in the religion of Christianity, slave culture rested on a conviction that slavery was unjust and a desire for freedom. Slaves very much understood their own exploitation and also understood the concepts of freedom and liberty themselves. Slaves created neighborhood networks between plantations that transmitted information. News traveled through these networks among slaves, local, regional, national, and international news. Slaves were generally more knowledgeable about outside events than most realized. Slaves generally played dumb to minimize their master's fears and deflect any antagonisms away from themselves. And this act of playing dumb gave credence to the white population's perceptions of blacks' inferiority. Now, these plantation communication networks facilitated among slaves the sense of a larger black culture and community, as well as resistance efforts against the institution itself. Well, that concludes part 4 of our Chapter 11 lecture series. Hold on, one more section to go. In the meantime, study hard, and I'll see you soon.